Hello and welcome back, and today we want to compare the Asustor software ADM and we want to compare it against the TerraMaster software. Now, I talk about a lot of NAS brands on this channel, but as much as I talk about the two top ones, I think you know which ones I'm on about, the contentious third place is often fought over by different NAS brands. We have Asustor, TerraMaster, Drobo, Thecus, WD, and indeed there are even more NAS brands, all fighting over, currently, the coveted third spot. Now what I want to do today is look at what I think are the leaders of that third spot, namely Asustor and TerraMaster. We're going to look at their software here, and we're going to focus just on their respective softwares today. And we're going to figure out which one's best for you. Not which one's best overall, but which one's best for you. Right, a few disclaimers straight off the bat. First and foremost, you can probably hear a hissing noise there in the background. Unfortunately, the Asustor I don't have for a vast amount of time. So, what I'm doing is trying to get as many of these videos done, comparing all these different brands to help you guys choose. The result is I've got several NAS devices on the go right now surrounding me. Consequently, there is going to be a little bit of fan noise in the background that I just can't get rid of. So I'll try to be as clear as possible throughout this video, but you can have to bear with me on that. Next, it's the fact that both of these two devices do have very different hardware. In the case of the Nimbustor 4 from Asustor, it's got an Intel J4000 series CPU, J4105, and it's got 4 gig of DDR4 memory. In the case of the TerraMaster, we are using a J3455-3000 series. That's a quad-core NAS, and that arrives with 4 gig of DDR3 memory. So you are going to have to bear in mind that both of these two devices have got very different hardware inside. Not very different, but different enough the results may differ. So we are looking at the software here, not the hardware, but that may play its part. Next, bear in mind that because we're using screen recording software, it does create certain limitations. So there may be slight delays to the opening of apps or graphical generation on this PC that I'm using because of the graphical recording software. So I will highlight that wherever necessary in case it does create an unfair lag when opening any of these apps. And of course, because we're trying to review them both together, I am split screening. So realistically, these should be viewed full screen like this, but in the efforts of keeping these things as fairly compared as possible, they will be shared screened like that. So it will play its part when we are looking at these two NAS softwares on screen. So do bear that in mind when we're looking at them on screen at all times. So without further ado, let's get started. The first thing you guys are always going to need to know is both of these respective NAS platforms arrive with their own client software. This is a bit of software for PC or Mac that serves several purposes. One, it will help you find the NAS on your local area network. The Asustor one arrives with Asustor Control Center, the TerraMaster with TNAS PC. And this helps you find the NAS on your local area network as long as it's connected to the same local area network as the PC, Mac or tablet or wireless system that you're using, and that means they're all using the same internet. But also you can use it for doing stuff like setting up a network drive, creating a remote shared folder, doing updates to the NAS without going into the NAS, and more. And you can list multiple NASs on a local area network on this one bit of software, as well as if your NAS is connected to the local area network via multiple LAN ports that aren't being truncated or link aggregated, they will all appear individually here. And it gives you the ability, if you're using a NAS that has maybe a 1 GBE, a 2.5 GBE, a 10 GBE port, basically a whole range of connections, you can flick between which connection you want to access that NAS. So remember, we are focusing as much as possible on the software today. So what you will do with either of these is you can search the area network. Mapping a network drive is painfully simple, and once you've done that, it will allow you to just add a NAS here on this list, so you can access the NAS as you would any local folder on your PC or Mac system, which is going to be hugely useful to third-party software that requires your NAS to appear as if it's locally stored. So if we remove that software there, we can look at their respective desktop interfaces. Now, they have gone for a very different range here. I've always said that many NAS brands fall into two categories: either the Mac design, where it is designed to be simplistic with all the hard decisions hidden in the background, or the kind of Android Windows feel that lets you have a little bit more configuration and a stand-up desktop interface. However, in the case of TerraMaster and Asustor, I can say we've actually managed to split that down the middle, with the TOS software from TerraMaster looking far more like a Windows desktop environment with double-clicking icons, whereas Asustor is a little bit more in line with Android, and indeed with mobile interfaces that we're all quite familiar with. If we go into it, we can see both of these devices going into their respective settings menus and control panels. We can learn more about their respective softwares. So if we move down and we look at the software that's on each of these two devices, remember, because of the split screen, these things aren't going to display as perfectly as you would like, but again, we're not going to nail the software for that. We can see that we're using TOS version 4.01 and ADM version 3.4.0, the latest versions of both of these softwares. Both of them arrive with completely configurable backends and the ability to add many users very easily. So if we look at access control on the Nimbustor and make our way back into the control panel, we can see both of these devices have got very different means with which to sort through options. Actually, access control was the wrong option there, I apologise. We want to go into settings, and from here we can see how these two different NAS brands have handled configuration on the back end. So in this option, we have got the configuration and the settings from everything to network to regional options, hardware configuration checks, notification options, how you want to receive notifications and where, as well as those important updates. Now, the control panel on the TerraMaster is a little bit more in the style of, dare I say it, Mac, and of course the Synology model that we've seen in recent videos. They've gone for an icon display that once you go into it, such as the hard drive option in the storage manager, we then go to a side option here, which again, I've never quite understood why brands do the flicking one and then the other, because then most users can't go back. They need to just carry on using this preset way of doing things, which always seems a bit clunky to me. I do like the TerraMaster software, and I've always said in terms of the evolution of this brand and how, what a short time they've been around, it's incredible what they've done, but it's still weird, this kind of icons to list display and no kind of intuitive way to make our way back. Now, in the case of Asustor, a number of these options, if we come back and go back into that main user interface of those options there, close that down, and go back into it, which again doesn't feel hugely intuitive, we can see that the control panel on the TerraMaster has managed to encompass a lot of the options available here. But as well as that, they've incorporated a lot of the other options that Asustor have moved into their own separate tabs. Now, again, this does come down to, I'll get lost, Windows. A lot of this will come down to your own personal preferences. In the case of Asustor, access control here is actually listed as separate options here. In the case of, let's get that access control open there. On top of that, if we move out of access control, and that's how you configure a number of users and how they access external devices such as USB peripherals, USB storage, UPSs, Wi-Fi printers, Bluetooth dongles, and of course optical drives all go there. And here is where they've gone for external storage. But of course, more external USB devices are supported on the Asustor platform than they are on the TerraMaster platform. So they probably do need this complete bespoke application in order to handle that many different kinds of supported USB devices. Still, I can imagine a lot of users not really liking the fact there's multiple icons with which to navigate all of these options. And I can see a lot of people, and again I'm going to have to do that going back and forth there, will prefer the fact that it's all in one user interface of the control panel rather than going through multiple apps here. But again, this is very much based on individual users and how they wish to utilize their devices. You can't really pin one better than the other because all users are different. Now, if we move out of those options, we can have a look at app control. Now, if we go to the App Center on the Asustor or the Nimbustor, depending on how we want to call it, and then we go into the application center on the TerraMaster, we can see that they're actually quite similar. But of course, as mentioned before, there are more apps supported on the Asustor platform. A lot of that is down to the fact you've got HDMI out, that although the TerraMaster has HDMI out, it's still only used for debugging and configuration at this time. Whereas in Asustor they have an entire dedicated application and graphical user interface for that HDMI out, as well as an enormous array of supported applications. If we look here at TerraMaster, we can scroll through there and there's quite a lot of apps. It's everything from Plex to cloud support, third-party cloud migration, everything from virtual machine use, but Java virtual machine use, and lots of third-party and first-party applications readily available with rsync, replication and backup and synchronization, Sugar CRM for those people that want a customer relationship manager for business, WordPress if you're going to host a WordPress blog or server, and of course all the applications that you would expect from a NAS brand for handling media via DLNA, as well as supporting popular third-party media apps. Both of these platforms support Docker for more contained virtual environments of individual applications and more. So those Docker container apps are always handy, and both of them not only support BTRFS as a chosen file system if you so choose, but they both support snapshot backups. And thanks to that BTRF file system, it means that those backups have those snapshot image backups have less of a dent on system performance than you'd expect, as well as self-file healing and background data integrity checks that arrive with BTRFS read-write operations. There are lots of great little apps there, and again, I would say there is probably a 2/3 ratio in favour of third-party apps, but the first-party apps that are on the TerraMaster platform are still pretty good. They do exactly what they're supposed to do, and although the user interface may seem a little bit dated by comparison, and I'm going to say a little because I actually quite like this kind of user interface personally, I still have to say that the ratio of first to third party is still very much in the favour of third party. In the case of the Asustor NAS, we see definitely more move towards third party apps, but a much, much greater number. They have hundreds of applications readily available. They have all of those applications for migrating with third-party clouds, such as OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive, and more. Those Docker applications, 2 dedicated Docker apps, in fact. You have loads of games and enormous support of retro gaming via arcade, SNES, NES, all the ROMs really do stay legal, everyone. Plex Media Server and MB is available on both of them. And of course, how MB or Plex Media Server performs on your NAS will definitely depend on the hardware NAS you go for. So we're not going to go into too much detail there. Carrying on, they both got support of virtual machines, of course, but virtual machines on the Asustor is supported with VirtualBox, whereas virtual machines on the TerraMaster is just Java based. And although they're, it's still pretty good. And I will be doing a full overview of that. I need to be really finishing up on that virtual machine video. There's no denying that VirtualBox just supports more VMs, Mac, Android, Windows, and more. And it's just more VM support on the Asustor than there is on the TerraMaster. And again, we're not saying one's better than the other. That's really up to you. I'm just trying to stay with the facts as much as possible. But there are just more applications readily available on the Asustor, and for every app that's on the TerraMaster, there's 3 or 4 different versions of that same kind of app on here. There's also support of things like Amazon Prime, Spotify, Skype, and other third-party apps, and there is a bigger homebrew and community app, building kind of forum-based stuff available for Asustor. And although a lot of those apps might not run as smoothly as you'd like, at least they're making an effort. Likewise, there is a dedicated surveillance application on Asustor, something TerraMaster still doesn't have at this time, which really surprises me, because the evolution of surveillance and IP cameras and CCTV in NAS storage is growing tremendously in popularity in NAS, and that's something TerraMaster has negated to jump on board with, either with a third-party supporter or their own. they should really think about partnering with another company, or at least showing people how to use network or iSCSI LUN targets in a surveillance environment. And it's just something that's not really happening with TerraMaster right now, if I had to really critique them in this video. Now, in terms of enjoying your media, your photos, your music, your video, they've both got dedicated ways in which to do it. Although both of them have their own file management tool, it's exactly as you would expect. If we open the file management tools on both, it's a very familiar user interface, and anyone that's ever used a Windows, Mac, Android, or any kind of platform will be very familiar with standard file management. The ability to share, the ability to mount and load individual storage arrays is possible on them both. So there isn't really one advantage over the other. I would say there seems to be a lot more options readily available on that Asustor NAS with ADM, but all those options are readily available here. But it does seem a little bit simpler, a little less intimidating, with all the options being hidden in drop-down folders and of course that settings menu. Moving away from file management, taking my weatherman tone of voice, let's look at photos, music and video. And remember, of course, we aren't going to focus too much on HDMI, but it's worth mentioning again that dedicated graphical user interface that, with the help of an HDMI port, not only have you got the standard Asustor ADM user interface that can be accessed by many users at once, you've also got HDMI with its HDMI out with its dedicated keyboard and mouse support, which means you can control this HDMI user interface with its own apps and more. If we move over to those dedicated media apps, we can have a look at looks good, have a look at sounds good, and have a look at the photo gallery app. So these are the three apps for Asustor that allow you to enjoy your media. From TerraMaster, we can look at their own media management applications. Now this is going to be a big deal breaker for a number of you there, because one area which TerraMaster, for a number of you, really lets you down is multimedia handling. You may have noticed there was a slight break there in the recording, and this is because the TerraMaster platform doesn't have dedicated individual apps for photos, music and video. Now again, this will come down to a number of you out there who, you know, the way you browse your media is important. Both of them have their own DLNA media software, as well as creating your own media server, and they've all got different options there. Once again, several applications, when there's only one on TerraMaster, is either a good thing or a bad thing as far as your point of view is concerned. A lot of you are not going to be enjoying media like this in your web browser, but there's still a number of people who do, and this is why it's a big area of contention here. Because you've got that dedicated photo application with Asustor. You can go there, go into there, and you can look at photos, open them up, learn more information about them. So in the case of this photo, you can see what took the photo, where it was taken. There's a Google Maps link there as well. Open it up and it will tell you exactly where that photo was taken. This was back when I was in Germany, in Berlin last year. Lots of information like that is readily available. Likewise, in the case of the music, not only have you got the ability to browse your music, have playlists and do more, as well as create favourites, even get album art to a degree, but on top of that you've got this media player here on the bottom and a bunch of streaming options and the ability to find more information and cast to other devices, as well as commit slideshows and more. And this tells you how you want to stream it, and if you're using an HDMI media output, there's an option, as well as devices on the network. Finally, looks good is that video application. Although it lacks a number of the polished features of Plex Media Server, which we will briefly look at, it's still got a lot going for it, with everything you can have broken down into individual files, folders, and everything broken down into subjects, TV shows, home movies and more. And playing a media file is incredibly straightforward. We can click play right there, resume where we left off from the previous videos, as well as if you're going to be doing transcoding, these options are readily available here. I'm sorry it isn't displaying properly, but again, because of the split screen that we're doing. And that will open up AS Player or Asustor Player, and the media will play right here. It opens up, boom, and it's an old bit of stock footage from the Internet Archive. Once again, I recommend you check that out. Same thing goes with the music, goes with the photos, it's all readily available to you. Now, as good as all that sounds, once you move over to the TerraMaster desktop here, this is where things differ wildly, because that file management tool we talked about earlier, that's your lot. There are other options. There are options like using Plex Media Server or setting up your multimedia server or a DLNA server using iTunes server, but these are all means that let you access your media on the external devices. You know, your Bose sound system, your smart TV, your PlayStation 4. But when it comes to accessing the files via the NAS, this is really it. So for example, if we want to look at photos on the TerraMaster, let's go into that same Berlin folder that we saw earlier. Open up a file. I believe that's the same file we accessed earlier. And it opens it up here. Let that open up. Move it across. And that's really our lot. That's it. If we go into information about that file, and again, don't have a go at the TerraMaster for the lag factor there, that's recording software we're using. We look at properties, it's going to obtain data, and it doesn't seem as quick as the other one, but again, we're not getting the locational data, we're not getting like digital information that's been stored in the file, such as the one that we saw over here, because it was taken on a mobile phone. If we move back and we want to look at videos, and we look at video files, again, we are going to come away ever so slightly underwhelmed. So let's go for TV shows. Should be some Mr. Bean and Friday Night Dinner. Let's go for Peep Show. We're going to double click that. And it opens in the browser. We've got that MP4 there, and it's running it. You know, obviously the frame rate, we can't get too much going from that on this. But the controls are just a little basic, a little bit underwhelming. Finally, if we look at music files, and again, I have had to turn music off because this is YouTube and you never know what the future will hold. If we go to the music files, make our way into it, we'll go for some Oasis. We'll go for Wonderwall, absolute classic. Opens it up here at the browser. And again, we will have to enable Flash, no surprise. And then the file is had to obviously refresh that, so it's not going to happen every single time. We'll go back into the file manager, and again, you only have to do this once, but still, it's not great. And there's our music player opening up in screen, and again, for those that remember the old days of music players, this is pretty much what that looked like. You've got the options there for equalizers and lyrics if you download them, but it's pretty basic. And if you are someone that's going to be enjoying the files on your NAS via the web browser, this could be a big put-off. But if you don't plan on using your web browser to enjoy your media, then this isn't going to matter. You may have noticed also on screen there, the little drop, the pop-up that gives us more real-time information about our NAS with regard to the hardware and what's happening to our network speed and what data is being used. Both devices have something like this, but I kind of like the Asustor one more. It's got this lovely widget thing that I talked about in another video, where if you go, oh, I don't really care about connected users right now, I can just get rid of that, and you can add different things to this list. Now, both of them can be accessed at any point while using the device, so there's, you know, they've both got the same usability, but I do quite like the Asustor one personally a little bit more. A lot of this is going to come down to how you intend to use your NAS server. Do you intend to use the NAS server via the network or via the mobile apps? It's worth mentioning that both of these providers have multiple mobile apps that I'm hoping to be working on in future videos, but there are just more apps really available for the Asustor, but also that is because they kind of need it thanks to that HDMI output and more ways to access their NAS. But again, depending on how you're going to use your NAS server, is going to dictate how you feel about how these two NAS brands have utilized their systems. And if we go to the storage manager on the Nimbustor, and of course in the case of the TerraMaster, if we want to access that kind of storage information, we've got to go into the settings menu once again. So once we go into the settings menu and find out more about this in that control panel, we can then see storage information. So in the case of here, we go down, we find storage. So we can go hard drive or RAID. I'm not quite sure why that's been separated into two separate options, but if we compare them, so if we go for disks, we can see that both of these two devices do give us some information, and I can confirm that both TerraMaster and Asustor both support Seagate Ironwolf Health Management, and neither of these have got an existing RAID happening right now. We've only got a 4 TB WD. We also have a larger amount of storage on this one thanks to the hard drives. They both are quite similar, but this is one of those areas where I do want a separate app for learning about some area of the NAS. There's actually a few areas that I quite like the TerraMaster single access point for configuration over the Asustor multiple apps, but one area where I want a dedicated app is a storage manager, because this is a very, very important part of NAS storage, and I want to know that I've got a lot of control there and it isn't just another bunch of flicky buttons in the control panel. But I might wrap things up here. I am going to be comparing Asustor's ADM against QTS as I'm slowly but surely making my way through all of the NAS virtual and visual graphical user interfaces for their individual NASes. Again, this wasn't about which is better. Both of these operating systems and graphical user interfaces give you what a modern NAS server should in terms of creating an account, mapped network drives, iSCSI LUN targets, virtual machine support, file browsing, file management, and of course things like Plex Media Server, with both of them letting you run a Plex Media Server, which depending on the hardware will make all the difference. Don't get me wrong, the interface of both of these for Plex is going to be identical. If we enter Plex, they both have the same user interface of Plex because it's a third-party app. I've not set it up fully on this device yet, but I have on the Asustor. But we can't really compare Plex because it's going to look the same on both of these devices, and we haven't set it up on the TerraMaster. But for the most part, I think what this comes down to is if you're going to be buying a NAS and you plan on using the browser interface, you know, more than a third of the time, the Asustor is probably the one for you out of these two. But if you're going to be using your own host device, either one of these, your own client devices throughout your home or business environment, then it doesn't matter which one you go for. It really depends though on the kind of devices you use, because thanks to having HDMI output, keyboard and mouse support, control pad support, better virtual machine support, better USB device support, its own dedicated surveillance application, and just generally a larger array of apps readily available both in the first and third party, Asustor does seem to give you more on this occasion than TerraMaster and their TOS platform. Let's be interesting to see where TerraMaster is 12 months from now, given their evolution, and maybe you don't need all the extra bells and whistles that Asustor are putting out there. But that comes down once again to you, the user. I'm going to wrap things up now. Hope you've enjoyed this video and you found it helpful. Do let me know in the comments below if there's anything I didn't cover during this that was useful to you. And otherwise, I will see you on the next video. Thank you so much for watching.